When my wife and I first moved into Willowbrook, we thought we had discovered the suburban dream. The streets were lined with trimmed hedges, children pedaled bikes down quiet lanes, and every lawn looked like it had been curated for a magazine spread. For the first few weeks, it felt like nothing could disturb the peace. Neighbors smiled from their porches, and we convinced ourselves that this was the kind of community where life would finally slow down. But the illusion shattered quickly. It began with a dented mailbox. The first time, I told myself it must have been a careless driver, perhaps a delivery truck brushing too close. I replaced the box and thought nothing more of it. But then it happened again. This time worse. The wooden post split clean in half. Tire tracks curved directly toward it, etched deep into my front lawn. Accidents don't leave patterns like that. Someone was aiming. That's when I met Wendy Carlson, the Homeowners Association president. She arrived unannounced one Tuesday morning, pulling her gleaming white SUV halfway into my driveway. She was dressed like she was headed to a corporate boardroom rather than greeting neighbors in the suburbs. Her smile was wide, but her eyes carried a cold glint that unsettled me immediately. With a thick binder pressed to her chest, she introduced herself and made a point to remind me about community standards. She spoke about mailbox regulations as if she were quoting scripture, citing measurements down to the inch. What disturbed me most wasn't the rules. It was how she knew I had been a police officer before becoming a private investigator. I hadn't shared that with anyone in Willowbrook. The way she slid that detail into the conversation told me she'd already dug into my background. From that moment, I understood this wasn't a friendly neighborhood welcome. It was a warning. The next morning, I discovered my mailbox smashed to pieces again. The tire marks didn't veer by accident. They turned deliberately toward the post like a bullseye. When I called Wendy to report it, she answered almost instantly, her voice dripping with rehearsed sympathy. She mentioned the placement of my mailbox being slightly off from the regulation line, as though that excused the destruction. She even suggested I hire a preferred contractor who understood HOA specifications perfectly. That's when my gut told me the game had begun. I rebuilt the mailbox myself, carefully measuring to ensure it aligned exactly with HOA standards. My wife, Chloe, documented the process with photos. She wasn't just helping, she sensed something darker at play. 1 inch off doesn't cause destruction like this, she whispered, pointing at the tire marks. And she was right. The arcs in the dirt showed a steering wheel deliberately turned toward the box. Days passed quietly until, like clockwork, the mailbox was wrecked again. This time, I studied the scene like a crime investigator. The acceleration marks, the way the impact splintered the post, it was clear someone had floored the gas pedal to make contact. I filed a report, but the responding officer barely gave it a glance. He told me without proof of intent, it would just be written off as an accident. His indifference told me everything. This had happened before, and nothing had been done. Later that week, I attended an HOA meeting at the community center. The room smelled faintly of burnt coffee, and the neighbors avoided my eyes as though they already knew what was going on. Wendy sat at the front, her smile as polished as her SUV's chrome bumper. When I raised my concerns, she dismissed them with a chilling remark about community precision. The room stayed silent, the weight of complicity hanging heavy in the air. That night, staring at the mangled post in my yard, I realized this wasn't about rules or inches. It was about intimidation. My instincts screamed that Wendy wasn't just managing the neighborhood. She was controlling it, using fear and fines as her weapons. Chloe, ever resourceful, began researching online. Within days, she uncovered something chilling. A pattern of families who had clashed with Wendy over HOA assessments or budget proposals. Each one had endured escalating harassment until they finally moved away. Mailboxes destroyed, fines piling up, property damage dismissed as accidents. She pieced together timelines from public records and social media posts. The Johnson family, for example, had voted against a proposed fountain fund. Within weeks, their mailbox was targeted repeatedly. Another household had questioned why the landscaping contract went to Wendy's brother's company. Soon after, they were fined for paint colors and lawn lengths until they gave up. I spoke to an elderly neighbor, Mr. Miller, who finally admitted what others were too afraid to say. He had been observing Wendy's tactics for years. According to him, she chose her targets carefully. Families who resisted her control or questioned her financial decisions. Everyone else stayed quiet, too afraid to become the next target. Soon after, I received a violation notice taped to my door. A $300 fine for installing a doorbell camera without committee approval. The irony wasn't lost on me. Documenting crimes in progress was, apparently, an offense in Wendy's rulebook. The more Chloe and I dug, the more sinister the picture became. The HOA bylaws had been manipulated, twisted with vague language that gave Wendy unlimited authority. But buried deep in the architectural guidelines, I found something she had overlooked. While mailboxes were heavily regulated in terms of appearance, there was no mention of materials. That night, as I stared at the loophole, I realized I had discovered my way to fight back. I contacted a contractor and explained what I needed, a mailbox that looked ordinary but could withstand a direct assault. He didn't flinch. Apparently, I wasn't the first person from an HOA-controlled neighborhood to request such a thing. He recommended a reinforced steel core wrapped in a polymer coating, complete with impact sensors connected to cloud storage. The installation took hours. Concrete poured deep into the ground anchored the post like a fortress. From the street, it appeared perfectly normal, black, regulation size, compliant in every way. But inside, it was built like military-grade equipment. Miller, the neighbor who had hinted at his past as a prosecutor, stopped by to watch. Over tea, he revealed that he had once specialized in prosecuting HOA fraud. He advised me to document everything meticulously, from notices to conversations. His words carried the weight of someone who knew the game when he was playing. Days later, my opportunity came. At dawn, I heard the familiar roar of Wendy's SUV engine. She barreled around the corner, aimed directly for my mailbox, and accelerated. The sound of metal colliding with steel reverberated through the street. When the dust settled, her Escalade's front bumper was crumpled like paper, while my mailbox stood flawless. Neighbors poured out in robes and slippers. Wendy raged, screaming accusations about booby traps and threatening lawsuits. But when I revealed the footage from my security system, her intentionally ramming the box, her expression cracked. The mask of control she had worn for years slipped in front of the entire neighborhood. For the first time, the community saw that their queen wasn't invincible. Wendy's retaliation was swift. Within 24 hours, I received a stack of violation notices, 17 in total. The charges were absurd. My grass cut to 2.75 inches instead of 3, numbers on my house painted in the wrong font, even a bird feeder attracting undesirable wildlife. The fines totaled nearly $5,000. But in her fury, Wendy had made a mistake. The volume and timing of these notices were too obviously retaliatory. Each one became evidence of harassment. With Chloe's documentation and Miller's guidance, we began gathering testimonies from other families. One neighbor had been fined for the shade of beige on their walls, despite following approved color codes. Another had been targeted for having 2 pumpkins on their porch in October, deemed excessive holiday decor. The most heartbreaking story came from Mrs. Peterson, who had been forced to dismantle a memorial garden for her late husband because Wendy claimed it violated landscaping rules. Miller then revealed what he had been quietly building, a case file thick with evidence of fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of power. Funds for community projects had disappeared, invoices traced back to Wendy's relatives, and financial discrepancies piled high. He had even filed a request for state investigation months before I arrived. All he needed was a catalyst, a case strong enough to bring her down. My reinforced mailbox had provided exactly that. The trap was set. With coordination from state investigators, we baited Wendy one last time. A staged social media post hinted at an even stronger mailbox installation. As expected, she couldn't resist. In the early hours of Saturday morning, Wendy's SUV crept down the street, headlights dimmed. She revved the engine, lined up her vehicle, and charged. But before impact, floodlights snapped on. Police vehicles emerged from driveways. Officers swarmed her car as the airbag deployed, leaving her dazed. Handcuffs clicked around her wrists while the neighborhood watched from sidewalks. She screamed about entrapment, demanded her lawyer, and shouted names of local officials she claimed to know. None of it mattered. Charges included vandalism, harassment, falsifying reports, and embezzlement of HOA funds. The evidence, videos, financial documents, and even a drunken confession caught on social media was overwhelming. Though she ultimately avoided prison through a plea deal, her empire crumbled. She was sentenced to probation and hundreds of hours of community service, ironically at the local post office. Every day, she now sorts mail she once destroyed, delivering envelopes into the very mailbox she had tried to obliterate. Under Miller's leadership, the HOA transformed. Unfair fines were refunded, pointless rules abolished, and transparency became the new standard. The community, once ruled by fear, began to heal. As for me, I kept the indestructible mailbox. It stands as a monument at the edge of my lawn, a reminder that even the smallest battles, when fought with persistence, can topple tyrants. Winnie Carlson had tried to control a neighborhood through intimidation. In the end, it was her obsession with a mailbox that exposed her for what she truly was.